You think Las Vegas invented the high-stakes gamble? You think smartphone addiction is just a modern glitch in the human brain? Think again. Thousands of years before microtransactions and digital casinos, our ancestors were risking their homes, their freedom, and their literal lives on the roll of a bone die. The addiction bug isn't a new phenomenon. It's a feature running deep in our DNA. Today, we're ripping up the history books to reveal the dark, untold reality of ancient vices. And trust me, the exact same psychological trap that destroyed the most ruthless emperors in history is probably sitting in your pocket right now. Chapter 1. The original Las Vegas. Welcome to the Roman Empire. The year is around 100 AD. When they weren't busy engineering massive aqueducts or violently conquering neighboring continents, Romans of all classes were paralyzed by a singular obsession, Alea, which translates to gaming with dice. But I need you to understand, this wasn't a casual Friday night parlor game. In ancient Rome, the wealth gap was astronomically huge. You had billionaires in palaces and beggars in the gutters, yet at the gambling table, everyone from the lowest street sweeper to the highest-ranking senator was an equal slave to the dice. They played primarily with tesserae, six-sided dice carved out of animal bones, wood, or for the ultra-rich, solid ivory and gold. They bet on everything. Chariot races in the Circus Maximus? Obviously. Which gladiator would bleed out first in the Colosseum? You bet. But mostly, it was the raw, unfiltered thrill of the dice. It became such a severe economic plague, ruining so many aristocratic families, that the Roman government panicked. They passed the Lex Aliaria, strict, brutal laws outlawing gambling completely. If the aediles, the Roman police, caught you running a dice game, the fine was crushing, 4 times the amount you were betting. Furthermore, if you hosted a game and a sore loser smashed your tavern to pieces, the law offered you zero protection. You couldn't sue them. But did the threat of financial ruin and state punishment stop a gambling addict 2 millennia ago? Not a chance. The Romans became the undisputed masters of the legal loophole. Tavern owners invented hollowed-out tables and hidden compartments. The second a guard walked by, the dice vanished. The entire Roman Empire essentially operated as a massive underground casino syndicate. There was, however, exactly 1 week a year where the ban was completely lifted, the Festival of Saturnalia in December. For 7 days, it was like the movie The Purge, but for gambling. Slaves sat at the tables and gambled openly with their masters. The streets literally echoed with the relentless, deafening sound of rattling bone dice. But here is the most insane part of Roman history. The law couldn't even stop the men who wrote the law. Rome's absolute rulers, the emperors, were some of the most raging, out-of-control gambling addicts in human history. Emperor Augustus, the man who built the empire, was notorious for it. We actually have his surviving letters written to his stepson Tiberius, where he bitterly complains about losing massive, crippling fortunes in a single afternoon. But Augustus was tame compared to Emperor Caligula. Caligula was such a terrifyingly sore loser and a severe addict that when he ran out of money during a high-stakes dice game, he didn't quit. He paused the game, walked outside, ordered his guards to randomly arrest and execute a group of wealthy citizens walking by, confiscated their entire estates, and then walked back to the table with their money to keep betting. Let that sink in. He murdered his own people just to buy back into a dice game. And then you have Emperor Commodus, who gambled away so much of the empire's state treasury that he had to fake an entire national crisis just to secretly cover up his debts. How does a man who commands legions and owns the known world become a pathetic slave to a little bone cube? We'll get to the shocking brain science behind that in a minute, because first, we need to travel across the Mediterranean Sea. Chapter 2. The Divine Gamble and Liquid Gold, Ancient Egypt, the land of the Great Pyramids, God Kings, and a board game that literally decided your afterlife. It was called Senet. If you walk through the streets of Thebes around 3000 BC, Senet was just a fun, secular way to pass the time. It was a race game, kind of like backgammon, but human nature is obsessive. Over the centuries, the addiction to Senet mutated into something much, much darker. It became deeply, terrifyingly spiritual. By the era of the New Kingdom, the Egyptians started to believe that winning at Senet wasn't just a matter of luck or skill. They believed the game was controlled by the gods of the underworld. If you won, it was undeniable proof that the gods favored you. Soon people weren't just betting bags of grain or cattle, they believed they were gambling with their eternal souls. The game board itself transformed. It was incorporated into the Book of the Dead. The squares on the board became a literal map of the soul's journey through the treacherous underworld. Imagine the crushing psychological weight of that. You are playing a game of Monopoly, but if you go bankrupt, you don't just flip the board, you actually go to hell and your soul is devoured by a demon and erased from existence forever. That is the ultimate terrifying high-stakes gamble. But gambling wasn't the only vice holding the ancient world by the throat. Let's talk about the original state-sponsored liquid addiction, alcohol. In ancient Egypt, beer was not a party drink for the weekend. It was the absolute backbone of their survival. It was safer to drink than the parasite-filled water of the Nile. It was used as medicine. It was literally the foundation of their economy. The workers who dragged the stones to build the Great Pyramids, they didn't use money. They were paid their wages in daily rations of beer, over a gallon a day per person. But here is where ancient history gets uncomfortably close to the modern day, when your entire civilization runs on alcohol and your actual paycheck is booze. When does a daily necessity cross the line and become a toxic addiction? We actually know the answer because the ancients wrote about it. Archaeologists have recovered ancient papyrus scrolls, like the famous instructions of Annie. In these texts, ancient writers literally begged the youth of Egypt to stop ruining their lives in the taverns. The 3,000-year-old text warns, "Do not make yourself helpless drinking in the beer shop, falling down and breaking your limbs. Your companions will leave you and say, 'Get out, you drunkard.'" They watched a whole generation of young men wandering the streets completely broke, violent, and unable to work. They didn't have 12-step programs or modern rehab centers, but they absolutely recognized the devastating, inescapable spiral of chemical addiction. The tools of destruction were different, but the human tragedy was exactly the same. But if you think the Egyptians drinking their wages was bad, wait until you see how another ancient government figured out a way to weaponize human addiction, turning it into the ultimate tool to fund the greatest military defense structure on planet Earth. Chapter 3. Funding Empires. You probably think your local state lottery is just a modern, harmless way to raise money for fixing potholes or funding public schools, right? The concept of a government secretly leveraging human addiction to build massive national infrastructure is absolutely brilliant, and it is incredibly, terrifyingly old. Welcome to ancient China. The year is roughly 200 BC, during the mighty Han Dynasty. The empire is in a state of absolute crisis. They are fiercely defending their northern borders against relentless invasions from nomadic tribes. Now, fighting a continuous war across thousands of miles is terrifyingly expensive. The national treasury was bleeding dry. But the rulers faced a deadly dilemma. If they raised taxes on the peasants one more time or forced them into more unpaid labor, the people would absolutely riot and overthrow the dynasty. So the government got wildly creative. They needed a way to tax the people without the people feeling like they were being taxed. Their solution? They introduced a state-sponsored, highly addictive game called Beige Piao, which translates to the white pigeon ticket. Here is how the ancient hustle worked. The game was based on the first 120 characters of a famous Chinese poem called the Thousand-Character Classic. Players would select a subset of these characters, place their bets, and hope their chosen symbols were drawn by the officials. Because the empire was so vast, they literally used flocks of highly trained white carrier pigeons to fly the winning results from the capital out to the distant villages. It was the direct ancient ancestor of modern Keno. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. When the government demands a piece of your harvest, you rebel. But when the government offers you a 1 in a million chance to strike it impossibly rich for just a few copper coins, you hand over your money with a smile. The game didn't just catch on, it became a viral nationwide obsession. The peasants played it, the merchants played it, the wealthy elite played it. The revenue generated from this ancient lottery was so astronomically massive that it didn't just fund the military's border wars. Historians and ancient records widely suggest that this exact gambling money, this river of voluntary taxation, was used to help construct and fortify the original massive sections of the Great Wall of China. Think about the gravity of that for a second. One of the greatest architectural wonders of the human race, a structure so massive it can be seen from low Earth orbit, was partially built on the back of millions of ancient gambling addictions. But this brings us to the ultimate, unavoidable question: why? Why were Romans risking their freedom and executing citizens for a dice game? Why were Egyptians betting their eternal souls on a board game? And why were Chinese peasants willingly handing over their hard-earned wages to fund a giant wall? To understand the why, we have to crack open the human skull and look inside the ancient brain. Chapter 4: The Dopamine Trap. Remember Emperor Commodus from Chapter 1? The guy who faked a national crisis to pay off his gambling debts? He wasn't just a reckless idiot, he was biologically hacked. The human brain operates on a highly complex reward system, driven primarily by a neurotransmitter called dopamine. For a long time, scientists thought dopamine was just the pleasure chemical, but modern neuroscience has revealed something much more dangerous. Dopamine isn't just about feeling good, it's about anticipation. It's the chemical of craving, motivation, and the relentless pursuit of a reward. It evolved to keep our ancient ancestors alive, pushing them to hunt for food, seek shelter, and survive in a brutal world. But here is the critical flaw in our biological hardware. Our brains are utterly, helplessly obsessed with unpredictable rewards. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. If you pull a lever and get a piece of bread exactly the same way every single time, your brain gets bored. The dopamine levels drop. It becomes a chore. It becomes a paycheck. But if you roll a bone die or buy a white pigeon ticket, and you might win a fortune or you might lose everything you own, your brain doesn't get bored. It catches on fire. The sheer unpredictability causes your brain to flood your system with massive, overwhelming spikes of dopamine just from the anticipation of the win. And the ancients stumbled right into this biological trap blindly. They didn't have neuroscience degrees or fMRI machines, but the creators of Tesserae Senet and Beige Piao accidentally built the most perfect dopamine delivery systems in human history. They managed to hack the human operating system thousands of years before the first neon sign was ever plugged in at a casino. Addiction is not a modern moral failing. It is not a glitch. It is a deeply ingrained vulnerability in the human animal. Ancient governments knew it, and they exploited it to fund their empires. Modern tech companies know it too. They literally study this exact science to code intermittent reinforcement into your favorite apps. Every time you pull down to refresh your social media feed, waiting to see if you got a new like, a new message, or a new viral video, you are rolling the exact same dice the Romans rolled 2,000 years ago. The bone cubes have been replaced by glowing glass screens, but make no mistake, the game hasn't changed in 3,000 years. We study history not just to memorize dates about the past, but to protect our own minds in the present. So the next time you feel the overwhelming urge to pull that virtual slot machine lever or scroll just one more time before bed, remember the Romans, remember the pharaohs, and ask yourself, who is really winning the game? If you want to keep surviving history and uncover more dark secrets the textbooks left out, hit that subscribe button right now. And I want to hear from you in the comments down below. What modern, everyday habit do you think people 2,000 years from now will look back on and realize was actually a massive addiction? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.